Welcome to this very special episode of the Franchise Marketing Show. This year at Coconut, we are undertaking a team challenge. So everyone in the team at Coconut are going to be climbing Snowdon, although I've just been told that officially we might have to call it something else in Wales. We're going to be climbing Mount Snowdon for a very special charity close to our hearts here at Coconut. Ian, our digital marketing manager, you may have seen on our last episode, spoke about his experience with burns. He is a burn survivor himself, and he also now volunteers for a charity, Dan's Fund for Burns. And we are joined today by Polly Brooks. Welcome, Polly.
Thank you.
Who is the founder of the charity. So, Polly, I don't know if you could kind of introduce yourself and tell us a bit about the charity.
Wow. Okay. Well, certainly thank you so much, Coconut Marketing, for inviting me here today to talk to you all, but also, for choosing Dan's Fund for your amazing challenge. Ian and I have got to know each other through the charity Dan's Fund for Burns that I set up nearly 23 years ago. So for those who don't know who I am, I was newly married and living out in Asia when I went on a holiday. I went on holiday to Bali with my husband who was playing rugby there. And we'd met at that rugby tournament 2 years earlier on the side of the pitch and fallen in love, gone back a year later, and he had asked me to marry him. So it was only just a completely normal thing in our world to go back to the same Bali Tens rugby tournament, even though we had just got married and had our honeymoon. And sadly for us, we were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. We had a fun day at the rugby like normal, gone out for dinner, and decided to hit the Sari Club, which was one of the two main expat sort of bars that everyone used to go to. And, actually at the restaurant, we paid up and the girls needed to powder their noses. And so the boys headed off to the bar first. So we let them head off and followed behind, and that's probably what saved my life, because when we arrived at the Sari Club, the boys were at the bar, and Dan turned to me and said, "Hey babe, do you want a drink?" And I was feeling quite full, we had a huge meal, and I said to him, "No, I'm a bit full actually, I fancy a dance." And I turned to my best friend Annika and Tina, the other girl with me, and said, should we go for a dance? So we headed off onto the dance floor, which was through the back of the Sari Club. And we'd literally only just started dancing when there was like a big explosion. And it was so loud, like over the DJ noise. And I remember saying, "What's that?" And I remember someone saying, "A gas explosion." And then literally that very next second, this enormous yellow light came towards me, massive explosion, and it was like this whooshing like you see on TV, right? And I just remember being thrown up into the air, and literally felt like went so slowly, but actually it was probably seconds that I sort of came back down, and everything sort of was collapsing in on top of me. And I remember then that after everything had finished collapsing on me, I had this one moment of clarity where I thought, I'm going to die. I could hear people screaming. And then I thought, I swore actually, well, at least I'm in Bali. And then I felt like a bit of pain on my left leg, and I thought, oh my God, I'm gonna burn. And I just was like panic. And luckily for me, for whatever reason, where the roof had collapsed in, so Bali had a mixture of straw roofing and tin roofing. And there was a bit of corrugated iron like on top of me, and I had like a wooden beam across me and like other bits and pieces on me, and I managed to somehow, like with superhuman strength that you have when you're on fire, pull myself up and out onto this roof. And I was wearing like the Vietnamese style trousers that wrap around, and a halter neck top, and my trousers came off as I pulled myself up, and I had a moment where I thought, oh my God, I'm wearing just a G-string in front of everyone. But I looked out across this roof, and all I can tell you is just the most terrifying scene of fire everywhere. Because obviously Bali, everything's made of straw, there was no sort of fire retardant fabrics, the whole thing went up like a tinderbox. And I looked to my right and I saw some other people running across what was effectively the collapsing roof, and so I just started running that way. And I was barefoot, no trousers, and somehow I managed to scrabble off the roof and basically ran screaming into this cul-de-sac and was sort of held up. And some lovely young Australian boys came over to me, and one of the guys had a blanket in his hands and managed to basically stop my hair from singeing. Well, it singed a bit, but like my whole face basically getting burnt. And I mean, I could talk for hours. I don't know how long you want me to talk about this, but so we were all then looked after and trapped in this cul-de-sac, and no one really knew what had happened, right? You know, no one would have thought at that point it was a terrorist bomb.
I was going to say, did you think it was an accident or something?
No, well, I just saw it was a gas explosion, really, because the bars all used to have gas canisters. That's what everything ran off, right?
Yeah.
So, although ironically, it was a year, a month, a day, an hour, a minute later, and that's what they had designed it to be after September 11th. So it was a terrorist attack. But at the time I didn't know, and in those days we had brick mobile phones, right? No one had their smartphone with them. And so I had no phone with me, but where we were trapped was where some hotels were next door to the Surrey Club, and there were some people who hadn't been injured, sort of trapped and trying to help. And there was a husband and wife team who were Australian and were a doctor and a nurse, actually. And they were sort of running around trying to triage and help everyone. And I just remember that they had a phone, and I was given a phone, so I was able to call my mum. And in those days, you remembered phone numbers, didn't you? Yeah. Because they're not all in your smartphone. Yeah. I rang my mum, and my poor old mum and dad got this phone call, and my mum put the TV on, and she just said she just went cold, like that dread. Like as a parent now, I get it. Like your child's calling, and they asked me, was I all right? And I said, oh yeah, I'm a little bit burnt, but I'm fine. I don't know where Annika and Dan are and the others. Can you call their parents? And so I was obviously really worried about where everyone else was, because I was at this point, had been put on a mattress that someone had taken out of one of the hotel rooms, and I had these young Aussie rule boys basically looking after me. And I was in a lot of pain, but I had no concept at that point what it meant to be burnt, just that I was burnt. And it was very, very painful, and it was about a 2-hour wait, I think, in that cul-de-sac while they desperately tried to dig out the road. They didn't have JCBs, so they had lots of lovely Indonesian people there with their spades, and some other locals or expats trying to get transport into us. And when they finally managed to clear the roads, they managed to get one ambulance in, but I think I was about 7th on the list in terms of priority. Because there was a chap behind me who lost both his legs, and while we were there, I know he was writing letters saying effectively goodbye to his family. Right. And actually I did find out down the track that he survived, which was wonderful. Wow. Yeah. But as I was 7th on the list, the first ambulance came and went, and then they were like, well, we can take you on trucks. Who will go on truck? And I was like, I'll go on a truck. I don't care. So then my memories are being put on the back of this open truck, and I had a little Indonesian guy sitting with me, and I had a blanket over me by then, and as we were driving through, bits of burning buildings, because the fire was spreading, were falling on my blanket and embers, and he was just batting them off. And I had this sort of slightly terrifying ride in the open van to the hospital in Bali. And it was just completely overrun with people being delivered. Like, the hospital had no ability to cope with mass casualties like that. And I think they were lucky to find me a trolley, and I was put on a trolley and left. But it was really through the life-saving help from Bali, in the sense that they gave me fluids, which you'll know, Ian, yourself, being a burn survivor, is so key to survival. They'd run out of morphine, unfortunately, so it was pretty painful. They gave me paracetamol. They gave me Coke, and I had a young chap, Indonesian chap, who sat next to me for 24 hours, wafting me to keep me cool.
So, Polly, you were awake for 24 hours?
Yeah. So we had 24 hours waiting in Bali in the hospital, and during that time, I was trying to find out what happened to my friends, and there were 2 teams from Hong Kong playing in that rugby tournament. One was mine, which later we found out to be totally decimated, but the other team hadn't gone to the bar, were on their way, hadn't quite made it, so they were trying to help everyone. Right. And so a couple of those boys found me in hospital, and effectively Australia said that they would take me to Australia to try and save my life, but they needed my passport, And so these guys had to go back to our hotel the other side of the island and basically persuade the hotel to let them into our room, get hold of my handbag, which had my passport and my phone and everything else in it. And it was through them getting my passport to the hospital that got me onto a plane, ultimately got me to Australia, and it's where they saved my life. So there's all these cogs in the wheel that meant that I survived, but you'll know with a 43% burn, with no sort of, I think the sort of cleanliness in the Balinese hospital was not quite all there, and it took time for all the initial operations. Normally you'd want water on you straight away if you burn, operate as quickly as possible. But it was really, when we got to Darwin, we were all triaged. And so there's another 24 hours in Darwin while they basically decided who was going to Perth, Brisbane, Sydney, and all the Melbourne, all the different places, because, there were not just burns, there were obviously other kind of injuries like amputations, shrapnel wounds, etc. And they tried to spread out the load, because if you're a serious burn, it's a huge amount of hospital time, like surgery, nurses, like care is incredibly intensive and time consuming and expensive. So I was sent to Brisbane in the end, because the girl in the next door bed to me was from Queensland, and her aunt and uncle came to see her in hospital, and at that point they were like, what do we do with this English girl? And her aunt and uncle said, send her to Brisbane with our niece, because we'll look after her till her parents get there. Meanwhile, my parents were on a plane. They'd managed to get on a plane, having had my call, and were heading to Sydney with no knowledge of where I was going to end up. They just knew I was going to Australia. And it was only as they were coming into Sydney that someone got a message to their plane to say that I was going to Brisbane.
Right.
So to cut a long story short, I was in hospital for 2 months in Australia while they put me back together. And the nurses and staff were incredible, like so positive, so kind, so wonderful. And all the time I was in hospital, they would occasionally moan that no one ever raised any money for adult burn survivors. It was always for the children. There was so little support, etc., etc. And so when it came to the end of my time in Australia, they'd been very good at keeping the press away from me. Press were all trying to break into the hospital to talk to me. It was such a big thing in Australia. Many people in Australia died. And I wanted to thank Australia for everything that it had done for us. Taxi drivers would refuse to take money. Like, we stayed in this lovely bed and breakfast who looked after my mum. My mum stayed there the entire time, and people came and went, my dad, my sister, my brother, and friends, and they couldn't have looked after us better. So we set up a press conference at the airport as I was leaving, and in that I announced to the world that I was going to raise money for adult burn survivors and for the hospital that had saved my life, which was a grand gesture. I then got on the plane home, and it was like something like December the 18th, I think. And I sort of launched back into the UK with the prospect of my husband's funeral, my husband's memorial, and basically trying to restart my life. And I decided that I was surrounded by so much pain, and it was really it was so overwhelming being the only survivor out of 10 of us. Like, my life had literally gone from champagne happy. I'd been married for 5 weeks, like literally, and it had just all smashed into smithereens. And so I decided that, like, I would try and raise the money, at least do something good. And we had a big memorial service for Dan in London in the January following the bombing in October, and we held it at St Martin's in the Fields. I don't know if you've ever been to it. It's on Trafalgar Square. Beautiful, big church.
Wow,
yeah. And somehow I got the courage up to stand up in front of about 800 people and announce that I wanted to raise money for burn survivors in Dan's memory. And we had a huge outpouring of donations that day, but then subsequently a huge amount of people approached me wanting to raise money. And so we decided to set up a charity officially, and Dan was a lawyer and working for Herbert Smith at the time, so they then helped us set the charity up properly with the Charity Commission, etc. But if you told me I think officially it was May the 23rd or something like that, 2003, the charity was incorporated, that we would still be going 22 and a half years later, that I would be raising money for burn survivors, I would have just laughed at you. I was just coping. Like, I just needed to do something.
I was going to say, Polly, I must say that's very soon after the
Yeah.
event itself, isn't it?
Well, I would say the way I coped with what happened was to keep myself so busy that I couldn't think about what happened.
Yeah, understand.
So the first 2 years of my life, I literally ran at everything. Like, I couldn't stop.
Yeah.
And I only realised that I was starting to get better when I was starting to want to stop. But when I was starting to want to stop, I couldn't cope with the emotions and feelings that I was feeling, which is what sent me eventually to counselling.
Yeah.
But 2 years, it was too painful to even go there.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, the amount of work that must go into starting a charity as well, that adds additional pressure as well, doesn't it, during that period?
yes, and because I wanted to go back to work. So someone said to me, like, very early on, like, it's really important when something so life-changing happens to not just change everything up. Like, just go back to what you know, because you can make knee-jerk reactions to things, and then, in hindsight, they're the wrong thing to do. Because I think I would have moved to live near my parents, I would have retrained to be a physio. If I and I had lots of cats and never got married again, so that would have been my knee-jerk reaction. But everyone said just be patient, just let everything settle. So just concentrated on getting well enough to go back to my job. And I was working in Hong Kong at the time, and my company were brilliant. BNP said that you could work. I could go back to Hong Kong. I could work in New York. I could work in London. And my parents were like, "You're staying in England." And I was kind of like, "Yeah, I need the support." And so, when I was well enough to go back, I mean, you'll probably understand I'm quite a determined lady. So I was like super focused that I've got to get well enough to go back to work. Then I'm going to go back to work, and I'm not going to let them ruin my life. And I'm not going to, they've taken my body, they've taken my husband, but they're not going to take everything else. But of course, when I was going to go back to work, BNP were like, "Well, we really think you should see the doctor. Let's just see how you are." And so I went to see the doctor, and they were like, "You're obviously really gutsy and everything, but I think full-time, you can't go straight back into full-time trading," which is what I was doing at the time. And I was like, "Oh, no, I can." They were like, No, I think we think you should go back part-time." And of course, they were absolutely right. And I did go back part-time, and I worked with one of my old bosses, a lovely lady, Brenda. And I sort of worked part-time for her because everyone wanted to go for coffee with me. Everyone wanted to see me and show me love. And I was also setting up the charity. The charity was sort of happening. And I had lots of stuff going on because there was government stuff in terms of like helping with, there was no terrorism help in those days. If you were caught in terrorist abroad, there was no package to help your family fly out or bring your body back or anything like that. So we did a lot of work with the government, and I was involved with we had a survivors group, and so there was a lot of stuff going on that I had to sort out. Dan's will, moving from Hong Kong, wherever. Anyway, so it was perfect for me to, I think I spent about 8 months working part-time, and it was only when I sort of then was mentally ready to go back to trading and full-time jobs, so I moved into that stage. And then I wanted to prove that they hadn't taken my career as well. So then I worked really hard for a couple of years trading again. But I did, towards the end of that, start rocking. And by that I mean at the weekends I'd sit in my chair and I'd start like just rocking. And that was because I was kind of getting ready to the stage where I actually need to start dealing with this if I'm ever going to be able to move beyond it. And it was that rocking and acknowledgement that my brain needed to work through all these things that then made me give my notice in at work, because I worked 13-hour days, and there is no way you can process the sort of trauma that I went through like at the end of a 13-hour day or at the weekend when you're exhausted.
Yeah, there's no headspace for that at that point.
No. So I then resigned, and then a couple of months later I stopped work, and I had a year of counselling, and I had a year of working through a lot of the pain. Like I hadn't. So when we got married, those days you didn't get videos straight away on your phones and stuff. We had a videographer, and someone had posted. Oh no, someone hadn't posted, but the video had been made, and someone from Hong Kong who was flying out from England had brought them out to Hong Kong, but not got them to me yet. So like I'd never seen my wedding videos. While I was in hospital, my best friend and my other friends' memorials and funerals all took place, and I couldn't be there for those. I was sent lots of videos of those. I was sent endless lovely cards and letters, and I missed memorials in Hong Kong and special rugby matches, and I had this box or two of all these things, and part of my grieving process was going through watching these videos, and I did actually start writing the framework of a book with a ghostwriter, which never came to anything, but it was all very cathartic. And after a year, I decided I was going to retrain, so I decided to retrain as an interior designer. And while I was doing all that, I did I put on a massive memorial for the boys, but also fundraiser, whereby we organised like a sevens rugby tournament up at Cambridge, where Dan went to uni, and we had like a sevens tournament in the morning. We had an International Legends versus Oxford and Cambridge Blues match in the afternoon. We had about 2,000 people there, and then we did a black tie dinner in the evening, and we got Emirates to sponsor it and various other people, and raised we raised something like 70,000 at the rugby. But I was really nervous the rugby wouldn't raise any money, so I decided to also do a black tie dinner in London in the following December. So in September we did the rugby tournament, and then we did the black tie dinner in December. The dinner raised 80,000, I think the rugby raised 70-something thousand. And I started my interior design course in the September as well. So I had this whole like, whoa, what am I doing kind of moment, which is when Joy, who I don't know if you ever met Joy, but Joy worked with me from the charity from that point onwards. So 2006 through to 2020, Joy worked with me on the charity. And she sort of helped me keep it going, because there were times when I had really young children and a baby and a toddler, and I didn't pay myself for 17 years for the charity. I worked for the love of it. And it was really tough going, a couple of those years where I was working in the evenings, whenever the baby was napping, whatever. It was really difficult, but Joy helped to keep that going for me. And really, as my kids started going to school, the charity sort of grew and, became, bigger. And
I suppose one of the questions, Bolly, thank you, is at that point, in terms of burn survivor support, were you basing it on your own lived experience in terms of what's out there in the UK? Or was there research involved too to see how survivors can be supported? Was there a lack of support? Did you see it, you're thinking, okay, there needs to be more here? Or was it just your own experience, or a bit of both? Or?
So when I was first burned, there was nothing in the UK available whatsoever beyond hospital care.
It kind of released back into the wild.
Correct.
Yeah.
And the only online support was the Phoenix Society over in the US, or maybe Phoenix Society, and burn survivors around the world, Michael something or other. And they were like, I remember the chats were like in the middle of the night, like 2 a.m. our time, and I remember setting my alarm one time to get up to join in, and it was very eye-opening, but not something I wanted to do regularly. In those days, the internet was really in its infancy, and so the original sort of the way Dan's Fund developed was that we were basically doing mostly financial grants initially, but also training for the NHS and buying equipment. And it was really, I think, probably around, if I can guess, about 2013, 14, that we started talking to some of the burns professionals through going to the British Burns Association conference every year about the lack of sort of peer support that there was. Although I have to backstep a bit, quite early on, so maybe 2005, 2006, I was asked by Greg Williams, who was then the burn surgeon lead at Chelsea and Westminster, to help him set up an adult support group, because there were not even in-person adult support groups back in the day. And so he and I set up the original support group that still runs to this day. Yeah,
that's fantastic.
In fact, they've got like a summer day in June, which I'm going to try and go to this year. And it's run by Lisa Williams, who's the clinical psychologist who we actually funded her post for 3 years to persuade the NHS that you need clinical psychologists for burns.
Something I had for 2.5 years after.
Correct. So back in early 2000s, the NHS did not think it was necessary to have a specific burns psychologist to help with burn survivor care. And Greg was so passionate about needing this, and he said, I just can't get this over the line. I need to prove that it's essential, and asked us would we pay for it. So I thought, yeah, no, I'm up for that. It took us about 2 years to get in place because we had to have eventually we ran it through the mental health trust, but to hire someone you need someone within the health service to actually take ownership and be their mentor and all the back end. Anyway, we got it done, and Lisa Williams still in post 20
That's
years
fantastic.
And just to understand the scale of that, the NHS now do that across the country?
Yeah, so after 3 years, we were hoping only to pay for 2 years, but it took 3 years. But it took 3 years for the NHS to take it into their standards as, basic standard of care is in a burn centre at some units, but the burn centres should have a clinical psychologist full time. And Chelsea Wetherspoons, I believe, have 3 now. So
I think Salisbury's got 2, which is where I was for 2 or 3 months.
Yeah. So
and I had 2 years of that afterwards, and I don't know what I'd have done without that.
Yeah. So I mean, it was a major achievement for a small charity like us, and it was a big spend actually. I can't remember how much it was, but nearly 200,000. I think.
Wow.
Back in those days, it was a lot of money.
Wow.
So those were sort of the infancies, and then as the internet was kind of developing and being more user friendly, and this is before COVID and before Zoom and all that. I remember having a meeting in a club in London with a core group of people, and I set out what I wanted to happen what I would have liked to have happened as a burn survivor, and we set out this sort of trajectory. And the project would be, the first thing would be build a website that would gather all the information about all the different possible after services and aftercare available around the country, and bring it to like a signposting type website, which is the Adult Burn Support UK website.
Yeah.
So we built that, designed that. That was the first step of the project. And within that website would sit an online forum, so people could ask questions. But that wouldn't be like a timely thing. That would just be someone go on, answer questions back and forth, and then build an actually weekly online chat. And it was that point, I believe, that COVID hit, where we'd already been using for a year this weekly online written chat, running it through that website, and that was already going. So during COVID, we were able to have these weekly online chats with our burn survivors, and then we were moving in at that point to our sort of Befriender peer-to-peer support service, which Ian got involved in. We were sort of training people up, and obviously with Zoom and Teams and WhatsApp dialing,
it makes it so much easier.
Oh my gosh! So because there was always this problem, and that's in that room back in 2014 or whenever it was, we were discussing. So Chelmsford had a trial peer-to-peer befriending matching system, but in person, because it just wasn't even thought of as a possibility back in those days. And they'd had 1 year of funding. And one of our ambassadors, a burn survivor guy called Al, he had been on that as one of the peer supporters, and he'd really enjoyed doing it, but then the funding got cut or didn't carry on. And so this was the whole discussion about how could we make this work. And then, of course, with the technology opening up, it meant that you could have someone in Scotland befriend someone on the south coast.
And the matching there is so much easier.
Correct, the matching. You don't need to worry about location where people live, and that, of course, is a huge benefit because, burns for those who are affected by it is so significant and so life-changing, and it really is endless operations and a huge amount of emotional work needed to process, but luckily it doesn't affect like millions of people like cancer and stroke victims or heart attacks. So the pool of people is much smaller, and so it is difficult if you live in the middle of nowhere in Wales to live near another burn survivor, or even people like myself, close, you wouldn't know I was a burn survivor, so you wouldn't necessarily clock someone out about. So to be able to put people in touch in that way is incredibly powerful, and the service gives just that mentorship, which I think certainly in the early days of being burned, they've got so many questions, you're scared. And then after COVID, so this was all sort of happening during COVID, and then after COVID we were able to restart our weekends away, which we'd had one just before COVID hit in Oxford. It was the first thing we'd ever attempted. We managed to get 40 odd burn survivors together for a weekend. It had gone brilliantly. We were planning our next one, we had the hotel booked, COVID hit. So the next one in the end ended up being in Guildford, near where I live, in COVID, because selfishly I was also moving house and getting married that year. And I was like, the only way it can
make
happen,
it nice and easy.
the only way, yeah. So
Yeah.
but I promised, and I sort of promised that I'd do one further away. So last September we did one in Newcastle, which
I couldn't make, and I will make the next one.
Yeah,
Yes.
you must make the next
Yes.
one. So the next one I'm hoping will be the South Coast.
Yeah. Oh, perfect. That's good for me.
Somewhere. You know, there's so many logistical things you have to think about, like, you know, how people get there, like, you know, the cost and, you know, what activities are there. And you know, there's just lots of things to always try and think about and make sure everyone's happy. But they do go down so well. And, you know, I watch people arrive who basically... you know, feeling very nervous and vulnerable with their burns, and by the end they're on the dance floor, like made loads of friends, and everyone's super accepting. And you know, certainly, you know, some people have said that they have felt totally free that weekend, free from stares, free from judgment. And you know, we try and do it like not only like in terms of the friendship, you know, quizzes and discos and stuff, but we also have some informative sessions from usually the local burn service, in terms of new techniques for surgery, say, or we had one on skin camouflage up in Newcastle. We had one on sort of eyebrow micro needling and what's it called when you do it? I don't know.
Yeah.
You know
I
what I mean?
what you
But
yeah.
Finishing touches, which is grouped down in West Sussex, that do some amazing, you know, giving eyebrows back to people. And then we had one on hair transplantation. Mark Bruin's done one on lasering. So we try and give a bit of informative, you know, updates.
I think that's so important, Polly.
Yeah, but there's a lot of burn survivors.
You don't understand it.
No.
You're scared, and you don't understand the technology used, what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Because it's so rare within the general population. You both don't know someone who's got burns, and you don't understand burns
And you
as a survivor.
and you don't understand your future.
Yeah.
And that's scary, isn't
So
it?
to meet someone and learn about it,
Yeah.
it's a double whammy.
Yeah. And obviously you've been through the service and now are one of our befrienders.
Yes.
So, you know, maybe you could give your perspective. Like, I've told you about what we are, what we do. Like,
I was, in 2018, I was in an explosion for the viewers at home. I was in my garage and a radiator exploded pretty much in my face. And I kind of went down the driveway looking like a zombie with, you know, I was on fire. And a guy came along who just happened to be passing and said, "Come and sit in my car." And very much like you, it had burned my top off, and there was a crowd of people there. And I remember the biggest thing was being embarrassed, thinking everyone's looking at me with my top off. I'd gone numb at that point. But I was intubated and flown to Salisbury, where I was in a induced coma for, I think, just under 3 weeks. And I stayed at Salisbury for, I think, 2 months. And was then released back home. And what I'd suffered was, I think, 20% burns, mainly to my body and hands. And initially, I was worried about losing my hands. But it turned out that wasn't the worst of the burns. When I was sent home, I started thinking, I can't breathe here. And it was only then, when I became more active, rather than being in a hospital bed, that I had quite significant... They knew this anyway, but my inhalation burns had caused my throat to get extremely burnt. So my vocal cords are paralysed. So 20% airway. My vocal cords, when I breathe, they don't open, and when I talk, they don't shut. So they're kind of like half-drawn curtains over the hole. So it's 20% at all times. And of course, like you said, Polly, everyone's burn's different. And you're kind of released back home, and you're kind of thinking, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? My life's over, you know.
Yeah.
And you're crying out for this sort of connection, someone who knows what they're talking about. Because, like you said, the NHS, there's not that aftercare thing. I was going back, thankfully, for clinical psychology, but no real aftercare in terms of support, lifestyle, that kind of stuff, signposting.
I mean, I genuinely do think that it's incredibly difficult for someone who hasn't been burned to understand what it's like to be burned either. I mean, even people who work in it. Like,
And everybody who's been burnt, generally, most of the time, it's their first burn.
Yeah, that's right.
It tends to not really happen
Well, I can say
twice.
it's like being your friend during that period. Like, I remember it so well, and it's hard. Like, someone who hasn't experienced it, what can you possibly
You're
say?
helpless.
Yeah,
because people don't know about burns.
Yeah.
It's not like, I suppose, which are obviously equally significant in their own right, and worse in many cases, like I said, heart attacks, cancers, strokes, much more prevalent in the population. So people tend to be a bit more educated.
And burns are such a strange thing. You don't appreciate what your skin does until it's injured, but also like the impact on your organs, like you're internally from burns. You think you burn yourself. Oh, you touch your pan or whatever. Yeah, it stings. It really hurts. Everyone knows that, right?
Yeah.
That's classic. But we were talking earlier about how like large burns twist and tighten over time. You wouldn't know that, for example.
The impact on the organs is huge.
And a lot of people don't make it from burns because of organ failure.
Yeah, I've now got kidney issues, bowel disease, a heart condition.
Yeah. And who would know that you swell up, for example, when you burn? I mean, no one knows these things.
Adam said, he said he was with my partner when after I was intubated, and I was 5 times the size.
Yeah. And my mum didn't recognise me as well when she arrived just before I was taken off the plane in Brisbane, and because last time I spoke to her, I said I was fine, and then suddenly I was wheeled off,
over time,
swollen, and completely bandaged head to toe.
I remember the pilot said, "We need to intubate you now."
Because your airways were swelling.
Yeah, and I said no until I spoke to my girlfriend, because she was en route, and I wouldn't let him do it, and he was getting annoyed, this guy. And I look back thinking, he must have been so frustrated.
Life,
I'm going, you're not doing it until she comes.
Well, very sadly, when I first was taken into ICU in Australia, there was a young boy who was 17, and his parents were told that he was doing really well. And my parents were told to prepare themselves for the worst, that I was in a bad state. And somehow I sort of stabilised enough in that night to go in for operations. And then, after a few days, I was moved to the burns unit from the ICU. But the young boy stayed in ICU, and my parents were staying in touch with his parents because obviously they were, going off for coffees or whatever. And we kept wondering how he was, and it was only a few days in that we found out that he had inhalation injuries that they hadn't initially realised, and he unfortunately never made it out.
Wow.
So it's internal injuries that.
And I didn't realise that.
Sepsis and
sepsis.
Skin keeps infection out, fluids in.
Yeah.
So, you need loads of fluids.
Adam and my partner said they were pumping stuff out of my lungs for a good 2 weeks when I was intubated.
Body goes into shutdown,
So when I'm released home, I'm thinking, okay, there must be someone or something that signposts. And I found you guys.
Brilliant.
And that was through Holly, who was a burns nurse at Salisbury.
Brilliant.
Hi, Holly. And
thanks, Holly.
She said, there's an online chat and you can share and talk. So I tried that for a few weeks and went from there because there was no other that I knew of resource, really.
So, I mean, there are Facebook groups and things, but they're primarily, not all, but mostly American.
Yeah.
But also, the way we set up our online chat is we set it up with the clinical psychology team at Chelmsford. They helped us devise the training for the moderators. So when we set it up, everyone was worried about, potentially things going wrong, like, either people being rude to each other or, potential vulnerable people, and how we'd handle difficult situations. And so we set it up with wonderful, guidelines, what to do if we're really worried about someone, which is why we make people register. We take, phone numbers, emails, so we can contact people if we're worried, and addresses, etc. And, whilst it makes it a bit more difficult for someone to join, it also gets rid of the people who are not burn survivor or hopefully are bots or whatever. But also it's it's in a protected environment, so that the idea being that it is safe. And
it felt very safe every time I was there.
Good, and we have rules in place. Like, although we're I don't think we've occasionally had someone who's very, very down and quite difficult to deal with, but we've never ever had to ban someone. But we can ban someone. We can stop. We literally take them off the chat. I think that as a result, the NHS like our chat, so they promote our chat because they know that it's been set up. And
they can almost relax as well at that point, knowing that there is something for someone who's being discharged.
And for the first year, we paid for one of the clinical psychologists to be on every week with us until we felt that actually this is okay, we can manage it and handle it. And but then whenever we do train, like for all the Befriender training, because that's all done by the same lady at Chelmsford. So, it's a protected environment, and I think as a result of that, people do feel safe and are able to ask questions, and it's a really friendly environment. And it's this circle of needing support. Then you come on to the chat, or we now do a monthly Zoom, and you're the one seeking help and advice, and then over time you become the
experienced one.
So then you get a newbie coming on, and then you can start giving your experience.
I think that's one of our next topics, isn't it? That cycle of. So how did I become a peer support? Did I approach you? Did you approach me? I actually can't remember.
So we will have approached you probably because. As easy as it would be to put out a message on social media saying we're looking for befrienders, we obviously want to make sure that the people that we train up are in a good headspace and are in the right time of their recovery. And so we've always approached the clinical psychologists at the burn centres and units and said, who might you think would be a good candidate?
So Jane might have said, my clinical psychologist.
Yeah.
Ian's up for it.
Yeah, I want to approach you, and then we would have made the approach. But because sometimes people think they're ready, but they're not necessarily ready. And we have had one or two who gone into the whole. I looked into processing to become one, and then decided actually no, they're not ready. And that's absolutely fine. But you don't want to be putting someone who's in a very vulnerable situation with someone who hasn't sort of dealt with their own. Psychological needs first. So we keep it quite tight, and we just trained 6 new moderators up in January. Not moderators, sorry, befrienders in January.
Yeah.
And we just slowly try and increase our pool. But as I said, it's an interesting thing because it's actually, we get quite a lot of people who inquire about the service, and then we do make people fill out forms, and we obviously need information from them, but also like to try and match people. Like we'll give them, the options. Is it, say you've got a burn on your face, do you want them to have a burn in the same place as you, or do you want them, if you're a man, do you want them to be a man, or you're not bothered, and so give them different criteria.
It's nice that they get that autonomy.
Yeah, so especially, Ian, you men, but like as a
It's
woman, perhaps, you burnt your breasts, you're not maybe comfortable with a man or whatever.
Also, the man won't understand some certain things.
Yeah,
so,
and there are just and someone who's hurt their hands, for example, would be matched with someone who's also hurt their hands, and so. But I mean, and we have a database which will spit out the top 5 choices, and then Jennifer and I do a little bit of our own. They've done already quite a lot of support, and then we approach the person. Not always a good time for the person who's trained, and then we find a match, and we have had a couple of times where the first match hasn't work for whatever reason, and the charity sits in the middle. So when we put a match together, we either Jennifer or I sit in on the first Zoom, and make sure we introduce them to each other, and then set out the sort of guidelines. This is how many times we're thinking that you'll meet, and we ask them to feed back through us. But also it's like having an estate agent when you're selling your home. You sort of wonder why we're here, but then it's only when things maybe don't go quite so well, or it's much easier to tell us that you don't actually get on with that person that well, and then or it's just not the right fit, and so then we're able to find someone else. And so we've had a couple of matches that didn't work the first time, but then we found the right person for them, and it's great. But sometimes we get people who initially ask and then disappear, and it may be that it's too scary for them, or suddenly it's just. And
some people want that, some people don't. I suppose everybody's recovery is different.
Yeah.
Some people want to help. Some people are happy to just live their life.
That's right. Actually, sometimes, you get, not over it, but you adjust to the new you, and then you get on with your life, and it's only something else happens down the track. Like, you have, a car crash, or suddenly you need more surgery, or for something totally different, but it triggers something. Certainly we have burn survivors who were burned as a child, and suddenly something happens in their life, and they realise they haven't dealt with the trauma. And of course, back in those days, there was no help or support. And I certainly feel like that. I feel like I'm a recovering burn survivor.
There's certainly a continuum. isn't it?
Totally. And now, you know, like I have much deeper fears in life than most people about people dying. I try and control them, and I, you know, do quite well, I think, considering. But, you know, I'm terrified about my son starting to learn to drive, beyond most people's idea of terror.
The thing is, what happened to us, Polly, sorry to interrupt there, was sudden.
Yeah.
So when I find a trigger for me is sudden events. That's triggering.
So if a balloon were to pop right now, I'd scream. Like,
yeah. Or something just unexpected might happen.
Yeah.
Oh, this has happened, whoa, I'm triggered.
Yeah.
If it's a quick thing.
And you know, you learn your triggers, which is good, and so you're more aware of them, you handle them better. But you know, it is something that will be with you for the rest of your life. But what you lose, you gain. So empathy. I think, you know, burn survivors are some of the strongest people, some of the most empathetic people. And I do say to people, like, you know, when you actually get to the place where you can look at your burns and accept them and be happy with the new you, the power you get from that is incredible. Like your strength, like knowing that you can cope with that, and going forward, you know, you'll be able to cope with things that many other people can't. So, you know, the positives do come, and we have a wonderful like group of burn survivors now that gain strength from each other.
And to get meaning from it too. Your story, Polly, you've got meaning now from your experience,
I mean, you know,
and
you do wonder what would have happened to my life. What would I have done? Like, would I have carried on? You know, I probably would have, well, Dan and I just got married, we would have probably had some kids, moved back to Kent, he would have carried on with his job as a lawyer, I would have been a housewife, and maybe had some dogs, or maybe not, who knows, like, you know, who knows, and, you know, it was very difficult for me for many years, like, you know, to not think, what if, but what ifs don't help you whatsoever, like, and I say this to my kids all the time now, and this is what I've learned with my life, that change is not bad, change is all encompassing all the time, and it's a route through life, and if one door shuts, another opens, and that door wasn't your path, this one that's open is your path. And my path was changed by Bali, and then since then I've been weaving my way through my life, and everyone makes decisions with the information they have at that time. The worst thing you can do is make no decisions, because, you know, you can look back and go, oh, I shouldn't have gone to Bali. Did. And this is what has
the amount of times
from
I've
it.
done that, yeah.
But
if I hadn't gone
my
into that
life
garage.
is really rich now from everything that I do, the benefit I get, for the work I've put in with the charity, you know, like, you know, I am proud of it now, but it gives me as well. I am a burn survivor, and I remind myself of that all the time. Like, I take joy, but also comfort and knowledge from knowing other burn survivors, and it would be very, very sad if Dan's fund was not around, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, obviously, in your early stage of recovery, before the charity was around, did you have any peer support from other burn survivors, or?
No, because the other so some of the burn survivors in my Brisbane ward, I'm still in touch with a chap called Adam, but they were on the other side of the world to me.
And were they also going through it at the same time as well, rather than lived experience later down their journey?
I mean, Adam was burned, and but he didn't lose any. Oh, he lost a friend actually, but his girlfriend at the time wasn't there. I mean, I was dubbed like the worst case scenario by the British government, because I lost my husband and I was badly injured and lost everyone else I was with, which was a lovely terminology, but kind of true. I didn't really know any burn survivors at all in the UK. I'm just trying to think. So in the 2006 Black Tie dinner I invited Simon Weston, or I paid for him actually, to come and speak at the dinner. He was probably one of the...
I suppose he was at that point one of the most prominent burn survivors.
And also I did meet, when I came back I had to go to East Grinstead, so I was still having dressing changes when I was well enough to fly home, but I wasn't fully healed. As a burn survivor you have endless operations, so I had some more operations in the first 2 years back in the UK, and so I was going to see other burn survivors, and we were helping other burn survivors, so, you know, raising money, but there was no group until we set up Chelsea and Westminster support group, I guess, and then funnily enough Sue Banda, who is now one of our moderators, who's a fantastic lady, she and I met at those support groups, and we've remained friends, and she's been fabulous. She's basically come and helped at balls, and she's always been and when I've had to do some filming, so over the years we've kept in touch, but no, you just don't, it's quite a rare thing to be walking around and see someone else who's burnt.
It is. I didn't meet a burn survivor for a good few years after. Online chats, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. But now, there is much more on social media now. Like, I mean, and I say this to my kids, right? So everyone's very down on social media, especially for teenagers and adolescents and all the bad things they can watch, and adolescents and girls and all that sort of stuff. But actually, it's about what you follow. So, if you look at my social media, I follow loads of really inspirational, body positive, visible difference charities and people. And, I think, but this is obviously what I'm looking at, it's a much more inclusive world. It's much more, you'd never have models with vitiligo and burns and Down syndrome. And so I say to, my daughter, choose who you follow wisely, because, if you follow loads of really, really skinny girls, it's gonna make you feel really bad about yourself. Follow inspirational people. But there is a movement, I think, for tolerance and acceptance, and it's wonderful to have been part of it. So
absolutely.
I mean, we've helped Love Disfigure. Charity is supported, and when you look around, the Katie Piper Foundation, we helped Katie Piper years ago when she was first born, and then obviously she's gone on to set up a fabulous charity, and I'm very happy that there's more. The more support out there, the better for burn survivors. And we have the Children's Burns Trust who help the kids, I
feel like over time there's this big network growing of support, and it's just growing. And it's taken a long while, but with the advent of social media, digital technology, Zoom calls, just to use one.
I really hate the fact, but love it. So last week someone came on to our online chat, and they'd been feeling totally isolated since they burnt in 2020. They just found our chat. Wow. And after an hour and a half of, chatting with us, they were just like, I'm so glad I found your So,
there's still people that are out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And, obviously we work as hard as we can to try and get the word out that we exist. So, we are quite well known, I think, around the burn centres and units now, but we send out our newsletters every year and our flyers, and obviously post on social media and do what we can. But still, people don't. And often, it is difficult, because obviously when you're leaving hospital, you've been in hospital for so long, you're really just desperate to get out by that point.
I think
you haven't even really thought about life after. So that's why it kind of slaps you in the face, because it's a bit like, it's each challenge. Your challenge is usually getting well enough to be out, because you're desperate to go
I think I was released too early. I think I pushed them too much.
Probably you were desperate to
let me go home. Probably by a month.
And then suddenly you're at home and you're like,
I'm struggling. So,
and then reaching out to the hard bit.
And then there's nothing there that you know of.
That's right.
So you have to. It's like a stab in the dark.
But
should we talk about Snowdon?
Let's talk about Snowdon. To me, it's making it even more of a amazing cause to be doing it. I'm so happy to be doing it for the charity, and Polly, you're going to join us as well, which is going to be...
so when Ian contacted me with this idea, and I was just like, that sounds cool, and we had our chat, I was just like, I'd love to do it. I've never climbed Mount Snowdon, but my knees are really quite shot these days, so my burns have unfortunately impacted my knees, and I did run, so the last big fundraiser I did for charity was ran the Royal Parks half marathon in 2016, I think.
Wow, that's fantastic.
And even I remember the physio saying to me, you really shouldn't be doing this, but I'm not going to be able to talk you out of it. And I was like, correct. And so she's right, we'll just have to get you through it. And it really hurt. And my knees are way worse since then. So this is a challenge for me. It is going to be a challenge, and my knees are going to hurt.
We can do it together. Up. We can give each other piggybacks.
But I think it's a good challenge, and I think it's achievable. Definitely wouldn't be able to do another half marathon with my knees, but I think and I know, Ian, with your breathing difficulties, it's going to be a challenge for you, and Jennifer wants to do it too. I was just thinking it'd be such a awesome trip to do.
It's going to be fantastic. So I don't know if me and Paul talked about this in the past video, but I had a dream that I climbed Snowdon, and at the summit sung Tears for Fears. Everybody wants to rule the world. And
just the chorus, or we're going to have to learn the whole song?
Just the chorus. Everybody just... And I woke up and told Adam the next day. I had this mental dream last night that I climbed Snowdon. And I said, why don't we think about doing that? And let's do it for a cause. And there's the link. And that's how.
And then you mentioned it, I think, at a team meeting, didn't you? And then I think the whole team were like, why don't we all do it?
Yeah.
So
yeah, let's just do it.
Yeah.
Let's do something that's
inspirational.
That's difficult and
Yeah.
a challenge, but for something good.
Yeah.
And something that's linked closely to our hearts.
Yeah,
You know?
and it's great timing because the charity, I cannot tell you, we're inundated with requests. I mean, partly it's the cost of living and
Yeah.
the horrendousness of the bills, but everyone is suffering, let's face it. But also, budgets are being cut left, right and centre.
It must be so difficult to manage that.
It's very difficult, actually. And we were very lucky that we got a large legacy given to us during lockdown, and that's why we had a lot of money to spend. And so last year I spent nearly £450,000.
Wow.
And it's wonderful to see the impact of that money going in and how it's benefiting. So you know how the clinical psychologist thing, this is like the LPG machines we've bought, which are mechanical massagers, which help release the
I saw
tightness
videos
and
on
stuff.
those, yes.
Yeah, so we've donated 8 of those to all the major burn centres across the UK, and then trained up the staff in a day in Birmingham. And so now they're all using these, and burn survivors can access it for free. Before they were having to, well, like Katie Piper Foundation had one on loan, but it was very difficult to actually get any treatment. But to cut a long story short, obviously we've spent a lot of money, and we want the charity to keep going. So we've now got to do more of a push on the fundraising side again.
So let's push Snowdon then.
Yeah, so it's great.
Wherever people are listening or watching to this, we will obviously link up to all the different donation links and everything as well.
I mean, this is not just any climb, I suppose. I've got 20% airway. Your knees.
Yeah.
We've got burns.
Yeah.
It's going to be, you'll have to cheer us on, Ad.
Yeah, I just have to pray
drag
we get
us up there.
sunshine. We have to pray we get sunshine all day.
We're doing it in June, aren't we? So
yes.
I mean, that's no guarantee, is it? But it's
No, this is England.
It's like, I just think, I think it'll be a great story. We'll push ourselves.
Yeah.
And it's for a noble, valiant cause.
Yeah.
Something that's linked to coconut,
Yeah.
because one of the employees has burns.
Yeah, that's right.
And there's the link there. So
and we will record the song at the top of.
We will do that.
And,
we will do that. Yeah.
Yeah, but I might have to learn some words.
Yeah. Should we just do the chorus?
Probably don't want me singing on camera.
That's fine. My voice is shot as well. That's fine.
Well, I was never a musician, so I don't.
Yeah, we'll all do a countdown at the top.
We all have to know what we're good at and what we're not good at.
Yeah.
We'll have to work out the best way of doing it. That's for sure.
Yeah.
No, that's amazing.
I mean, that's one of the wonderful things about actually life and what's happened to me and setting up the charity is that the amount of fun things or crazy things that have happened to me. Experiences, like I've had people give me holidays.
Wow.
I've had I've got my MBE, so
fantastic.
Class, I met Princess Anne,
Wow.
do crazy stunts like this, and my daughter said to me the other day, she said, "Do you know what, Mum?" She said, "I'm glad I have a busy mum because it's made me more independent." And at times I felt guilty, that I'm busy doing all these things for other people, but then I'm like, I'm showing my children what is right and what is wrong. Setting an example about being a strong, powerful survivor, working.
And also your journey has meaning because you're doing it for a cause.
Yeah.
You're not just getting on with your life and working and that's that.
Yeah.
Which some people do and that's great.
Yeah.
And that suits them.
Mm.
I think the first thing I said to you, Ad, was I want to help people. Was that right when I woke up?
Yeah, and I think it gives people
meaning,
don't they, in their recovery?
I mean, especially when you nearly lose your life, you reassess, don't you, your priorities?
Yeah, and so if it has any kind of meaning, I'm not saying it's worth it for me, but you feel like it gives it something.
Yeah.
It gives it a cause,
and
that's a beautiful thing. It doesn't all have to be doom and gloom, and because a lot of the times it is. For us, it's very difficult.
Very tough times.
Yeah, so to give something that's a positive back, just be brilliant. I just hope I can get up there.
I'll push you up.
We will find a way. There's enough of us to find a way, I think.
Well, we just take it slow and steady, it'll be all right.
Yeah, we'll take it slow and steady.
Lots of deep breathing through the nose.
Lots of deep breathing. I've got a cross-trainer schedule.
A little bit of training.
Yeah, a little bit of training. And you guys are super fit, so I'll just take inspiration from you.
I don't walk very much. Or up mountains, that's for sure.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't think my body's that...
We can take inspiration from each other and spur each other on.
Yeah, I think grit and determination we're good at.
Yeah, absolutely. It comes by nature.
I can imagine that, yeah, but you two, I think you'll be at the front probably.
Well, so I think for me it will be the aftermath. So I think I'll do it, but it'll be my knees will swell up for a few. I was thinking I've got a month before we go on our family holiday for my knees to kind of swell back down.
Right, you got a bit of time for recovery.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, Polly, thank you so much for sharing your story, and Julian. I mean, as I say, I think for all of us in Team Coconut, it spurs us on even more to do the challenge. So, yeah, thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Thank you.